let me ask you a question. Have you been making this most common chess mistake in your games without even knowing it? I'm Grandmaster Max Illingworth, and I'm going to be sharing with you some really great news. If you have been making this most common chess mistake and not knowing it, you are not alone. In fact, in the recent World Chess Championship match, one of the players made this most common chess mistake, and it is very, very likely that this has just cost him the title of World Chess Champion. If you want to find out more, check out the rest of this video, and also make sure to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more of my Grandmaster high-performance chess content. So, this game was played between Magnus Carlsen as white against Ian Nepomniachtchi as black. But before I get into that game, what is the most common chess, say it for me, mistake? Well, there are many common chess mistakes, but the one that we're going to be talking about in this jam-packed training video is not playing to the demands of the position, or not playing to the requirements of the, say it with me, position. So, what exactly does this mean, not playing to the demands of the position? Well, let me give you an example. So let's say, for example, as we take a couple of openings before I get into the actual game, say we have some very solid, boring London system that we play, something like bishop to f4, I got my London on the board, fist pump, knight f6, e3, and c5. At this point you suddenly say, oh, I'm going to attack my opponent with everything that I have. c4, let's attack you. And then after c4, let's say they play take, and we say, oh, let's attack you again. I'm going to play bishop takes b8. I'm going to attack you. Queen a4. Look at me. I'm such a tactical genius. I'm forking the king. I'm forking the pawn. What you going to do about that, sir? Well, what would you do about this if you're in this position? Well, the answer is that white's attack just doesn't work. After bishop to d7, we have queen takes a7. White takes the pawn, but black just can even take back. There are a million good moves here. I'm not going to waste your time with Stockfish saying +5 everywhere. But we can certainly see that this position is not really worked out for white. If white does take the pawn, for example, then black can just continue attacking with his lead in development. For example, rook to c8. And we can sort of see that black is well ahead in development here. White can't move that bishop out of the way because then rook c1 and the white king is under a big attack. And if you try to defend the bishop with knight d2, then black has moves like bishop h6. And you can see that as a result of white trying to attack too early, when his position wasn't, wasn't ready for it, well, it means that now black has got a massive initiative. He's taken control of the game. And just look at these beautiful bishops. Look at this bishop here, threatening to take this knight. Take this knight. I'm not playing the moves on the board. I'm getting you to visualize it because that will make you a better chess. Player. Better chess player. Good job. And so if we can take the knight on f3 and take knight on d2 of the bishops, then black will just be free to take that bishop on c4 where it's no longer defended by a knight. You with me so far? Great work. So that's an example of a player trying too hard to play aggressively when the position doesn't demand it, when the position demands a more slow and more strategic build-up of the position. And we're going to see that also in the game, but before I get to the game, one more example of a player not playing to the demands of the position. And it's something that you're going to see a lot, especially at the 1600 level and below. Not to single you guys out, but to sort of show the weaknesses and the mistakes your opponents are going to make, so then you know how to beat them much more easily. Good or good. So, the next example I'm going to use is one with a very sharp type of position, and, well, what could be sharp in an opposite side castling? Let's say e4, c5. Again, I'm going to fast forward a little bit past the opening moves, but you know, I have standard open Sicilian, knight f6, knight c3, and this is the knight, the knight off, you got it right. And let's say white plays English attack. So English attack is a very aggressive system, bishop e3, e5, the knight retreats out of the attack, we play f3. Let's say black develops normally, of course. There are a lot of moves that black can play, but just to get a position on the board. let's say you get some position like this one here, where black goes b5, just to, for argument's sake. And let's say here white decides not to play the standard g4, g5 and go for the pawn storm and say, well, we have an attacking race. Who will win? Black's attack on the queen side or white's attack on the, on the king side. So it's an attacking race. And let's imagine that instead of trying to get ahead in that race and charge those pawns forward, get the runners on the board, instead white plays some move like a3 to prevent the move b4. Now maybe a3 doesn't lose the game by itself, but let's say white now says, oh, I'm so scared of this attack, so I'm going to play a move like king to b1 in this position, trying to defend against the attack. Black moves the knight, trying to get the knight in this way, and white says, oh, I'd better move out of that. I'm going to play queen f2 and get out of the attack, and after knight c4, I'm going to bring my bishop back to c1, and I'm going to go all defensive and put all my piece around their king so they can't mate me. But you can see that's the wrong approach to the position, right? So what happens is, well, in these cases, rather than trying to defend against all the opponent's threats passively, what you should do instead is it's much more important to play very aggressively, to play with a lot of speed. So, for example, some move like g4 and then knight b7, g5 is a much more appropriate way to handle the position. Rather than defending passively against their ideas, we create some ideas of our own. We have the pawn storm and we try to mate black's king. Simple as that. So now do you have an idea of how the most common chess mistake manifests in it? Basically, it's where instead of trying to play the best moves in the position or asking what does the position demand, it's where instead a player tries to force their demands onto the position. And have you ever gone into a game where you said, I already know how I'm going to win. I'm going to play a beautiful romantic attack. I'm going to sacrifice the queen, not as a Botez gambit, but to set up a beautiful checkmate. And the board will be showered with gold coins. Sound familiar? Maybe you know someone like this, perhaps even quite personally. Or maybe you're one of these guys or girls who says, oh, I'm going to win a beautiful Karpovian positional squeeze. I'm going to suck the life out of all my opponent's position, give them no counterplay, and then convert my positional advantage with masterful endgame technique that would have Capablanca cheering from his grave. Sound familiar? Well, probably you relate to at least one of these depending on your chess style, but whatever your chess style is, it doesn't matter because this most common chess mistake, well, anyone can fall into it, and in our game that we will see between Carlsen against Nepomniachtchi, we're going to see Nepomniachtchi try to force his demands of, I need to win this game with black to have a chance in the match against Magnus Carlsen. And we're going to see how that attitude in a position that didn't warrant it led him to, unfortunately, make this mistake of not playing to the demands of the position. I think it'll make you feel better, right? To know that if Nepo can make this mistake, then you don't need to beat yourself... You don't need to beat yourself up when you make this mistake yourself. Take it on the chin, learn what you can from it when you do make the mistake, and move on. But you might have recognized just from having that awareness of, okay, this is something that when I have a position, I shouldn't try to force, like, I need to make this idea of mine work, or I need to play this in a super aggressive way, or play in a super safe way. Instead, you can ask yourself a much better question of, what does the position require here? And if you don't know, well, you can give it your best shot, but at least you're thinking in terms of what is the best move in the position rather than what is the way that I would like to play it. It's a very important distinction that will make you a much, stronger chess player. Let's continue. I can hear a kid that just fell outside. They're like screaming like they're dying from jumping off while out of parachute. Kind of like Nepo did in this game. He jumped off the cliff without getting the parachute ready. So let's see how that turned out for him. So Carlsen was playing with the white pieces. We had e4, e5. This is round 8 of the World Chess Championship. This is what you came here for. This is what you love to see. Where, okay, we don't have a Berlin. That's the good news. But we do have a Petroff. And the Petroff is often used in World Championship matches by players like Kramnik, Fabiano Caruana, and some others to try to make a solid draw. Just cancel out the opponent's white pieces. Because after all, we have the white pieces. You have a little advantage in your opening to move first, yeah? So white plays not the move knight takes e5 that Carlsen did in game 4. But instead, goes for the move d4 in this position. A more aggressive approach, and one that if you are wanting to get a big advantage against your opponents in the opening, well, there is one way to go about it where you don't play the move that your opponent necessarily has faced in all their games, but you find a slightly different way to play it, where if they don't find exactly the right moves, you get a really good position. And d4 is one of those moves, because, you know, ed4 gives you e5, and suddenly it's not so easy to find a great square for the knight. You know, knight e4, we see the black knight is a little bit shaky in the center, and white has a bit more space. I mean, you can look up this theory for yourself, but this is the idea as to why d4 is such an effective move, in my experience, below the 2000 to 2200 level. As we'll see in this game, it works pretty well against Grandmasters too. Black took the pawn when knight takes e4. And now a lot of people would assume, well, you have to take on e5. You know, it's checkers. You have to recapture immediately. Not so. Instead of recapturing, we can play a what type of move? Go on, tell me what is the type of move we can play instead. An intermediate move. Or you may know of it as an intermezzo, if you like Italian things, you know, pizza, pasta. I know I enjoy it. So that's also another reason I enjoy bishop d3. Attacking that knight with a tempo. Black defends with pawn d5. You can take the pawn either way. d5 gives a bit more imbalance to the pawn structure, which may be useful against a low-rated player if you're going all out for the win, but Carlsen played to the demands of the position instead. Good work, Magnus. You didn't fall for the same mistake as Nepo, and you play knight e5. Making sure you have that extra tempo of bishop d3 in a symmetrical position. So it's a symmetrical position. Obviously, this is not going to be, you know, fling all the pieces at the king and see what sticks, but it's going to be a bit of a slower build-up. So black plays knight d7, wanting to trade off the knights one way or the other. And Carlsen says, well, I'll take you. Black takes back, getting the bishop to a better square of the recapture. And white now plays the move knight d2 himself, where sometimes it happens in chess that you see your opponent plays a good idea, and you say, well, maybe I can use that idea for... what's the word? Myself. Exactly. And so the idea of knight d2, rather than, let's say, just castling like most people would do without thinking, is that if black takes the knight, well, our bishop gets to a more active square of the recapture. Kind of the same idea we saw at knight d7, true or true. And probably Nepo should play the move f5 objectively and try to keep that knight in the face, saying, you'll never get rid of me, I'm the big bad wolf. Well, the big bad wolf did get rid of. I mean, there is going to be at some point a move like f3, but at least that knight's in the face and not so easy for white to get rid of. And by the way, this is one of the main ideas of the Petroff, actually, to say that knight on e4 can provide a strong point for an attack later in the game. At least before the engines made it a boring drawish opening, but it is what it is. But instead of this, Nepo plays knight d2, bishop d2. And once again, we see that Nepo maybe slightly misjudges the demands of the position. Perhaps he thought, well, okay, this is a position where I just develop normally and just the game continues naturally. But here, a move like queen e7 is actually a little bit annoying to check the king. And, well, the point is that an endgame, something like queen to e2, for example, this is just very, very safe for black. Something like take, let's say, king takes e2. And, okay, white is maybe a tiny bit better because the king is in the center and you have an extra tempo, but at this esteemed level of 2800 plus raid players, or in Nepo's case, let's say 2780-ish, well, then the game will most likely end in a draw because the players are just too good to blunder in such a position, for the most part. But instead of having a boring ending and a boring draw that would never have made a video, Nepo says, I'm time to light the board on fire! And he plays bishop to d6, castles, and he plays a crazy move, but it's a crazy move that actually is not so bad. Shows Nepo bring a bit of those creative juices, being a creative genius. You're never going to guess the move that he played here, but I'm sure you're going to try anyway, and you can always pause the video if you want some time to think about it, or we will just carry on with more of this fun analysis, because I know you want to see the most common chess mistake Nepo makes, and even though this move is not a mistake per se, it's an example of the kind of thinking that led him to his mistakes later, of trying too hard to force an attack in a position that didn't really demand it that much. Well, what if black plays a move like castles, just puts the king to safety? Now, it's kind of funny, actually. Sam Shankland wrote in his notes for chess.com that queen h5 wins a pawn because of the fork, yeah? But if you didn't just jump to that conclusion, but you test your assumption, an important part of calculating like a master, then you'll realize that black has the move f5, and black is not losing a pawn, because we blocked this and we blocked this. Of course, white is still clearly better because, well, of course, maybe I'm being a little too confident in saying that, but certainly after bishop g5, we can see that black has got some problems, because if you play bishop e7, the problem is that you're stuck with this really bad bishop versus white's really good bishop, because you might notice how the pawns on d5 and f5 greatly constrict the bishop on d7, and also bonus points, congratulations if you realize that also the e5 square becomes a very nice outpost for our pieces once f5 is played. So that's why it's kind of good to have the bishop to cover that e5 square on d6. But if you play queen e8, instead white just moves the queen back. Because black's king is exposed, it makes sense to keep the queens on the board. True or true? And white just has a very nice initiative, you know. The rook is coming into the attack. The bishop can still trade. That's still a very good trade to get rid of black's good bishop for our not as good bishop. And white would have a clear advantage, but of course this falls a little bit outside the scope of our analysis. Computer thinks that a move like bishop e6, which kind of has the idea of preparing castles but defending the pawn so you don't have to play f5, it considers this to be a better approach to the position, and I should add, by the way, that you do also have the option of castling long. So, for example, a move like queen to f6 and trying to castle long is also an option for black. If he wants to make the game more spicy, this maybe is a better way to do it. But Nepo plays h5, and, well, I think that, to be fair, this is actually not such a bad decision. Normally, this sort of move would be a mistake in these kind of positions because, well, rook e1, for example, and, you know, if the king has to go to f8 in this position, which the computer says yes, you do, because you don't want to put the bishop in a peon in e-file, well, then, yeah, the king's lost the right to castle, and white just gets to open up the position and just, you know, win with an attack. Normally, that's what would happen, but this position is not quite that simple because of the fact that the knights have been traded, and also because of the fact that if you do, let's say, play queen f3 in this position, well, black can be a bit annoying himself. He's got these moves like bishop g4, and we see that h5 is not kind of as dumb of a move as it looks at first sight. Because if you take that pawn with queen takes d5, then big tactical shot, this to make sure that you're still awake. You don't want people falling asleep to YouTube videos, even if it does boost the view time. So the answer, well done if you found it, is bishop takes h2. Good job. King takes h2, queen takes d5, and black wins the queen. And of course, white is not forced to play queen takes d5. He can move the queen to safety on e3. But still, we can see the queen is a bit awkwardly placed. Black could even trade the queens if he wants to be boring, like most World Championship matches, and, well, that would keep the king a lot safer if the queens are off. True or true? So, instead, Carlsen played it a different way. I think probably the best way to play this position is to play the move c4, kind of following the principles. You know, chess often just about being able to implement the simple things the right way. And one of the simple principles of chess is that if you can open up the position, let's say dc4, rook e1 check just to provoke king f8. Well, we can see here that the opening of the center definitely makes it much easier to attack that black king. We have a lot more open lines now to go after. My arrow's getting a bit overexcited, but you get the idea that there are some clear weaknesses in black's position. But admittedly, this is not so easy to see, and the reason I think that Carlsen didn't play this, and this going a little bit advanced, but this will help you to understand something that the players didn't understand in the game, a little Grandmaster or actually chess computer secret. So I think the reason Carlsen didn't play this way is because he said, well, queen h4, and I'm losing a pawn. What do I do about that? And this would be a good move, except for the fact that white has a very beautiful idea in this position. And if you want to know what it is, I'm sure you do, right? It's the move queen f3. We threaten the mate, and we sort of, again, appreciate that the threat to the pawn, it's real, but in a way it's not real at the same time. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that, yes, they have this idea to take our pawn with check on h2, and of course, to play really good chess, we should be cognizant of our opponent's ideas, right? But at the same time, we also should consider first, can I just ignore that threat? Can I make a stronger threat than what my opponent's threatening on me, so that I take control of the game, so that I'm that guy on the football field. I take possession of a soccer ball and I can score the goals. That's really all the initiative is, in case you're wondering, like, I don't know what is the initiative. Basically, it's like having the ball in football or soccer for my Australian friends who are watching this. Hey. So, after queen f3, black could take with the queen, but then the king just moves away, and queen h1 is not really that great because, well, now your queen is under attack. You're threatened with mate still with queen takes f7. Not nice. And if rook e8, well, I could even do a king march. You thought this was the Blanc cloud. Wait till you see king to d3. Threatening the queen. Still threatening mate. Rook takes doesn't help because, well, you just mate on f7. So that's easy enough. And, yeah, white just wins. Now, of course, black is not forced to play queen h2. He could, for example, play bishop takes h2 instead. And the king slides over to f1. But even though you lose the pawn with check, you're going to get it back anyway with queen takes here or queen takes here. And if they go queen to f6, actually, you can even play like bishop takes b4 or bishop b4 check. Or you can take b7 directly. It also works. Position is still quite complex, but once you do get that pawn back with something like this, for example, I mean, black's king is more exposed than white's king because the rook on h8 is still not managed to involve itself in the game by contrast to white's rook on e1. Black also has a few weak pawns like c7, a7 are isolated, and that does give white a pretty pleasant advantage to work with here. So going back, c4 is probably the best move, but Carlsen showed a very deep understanding of his opponent. He realized that, okay, the position is demanding that I play c4, but I can't quite make it work. He obviously didn't see queen f3 because if you don't see this queen f3 pawn sack idea, it's very hard to have the gumption to play a move like c4. And Carlsen says, you know what, I'm not feeling too sharp today. I'm feeling a bit tired from playing 2 tough games of chess, including that marathon round 6 of that 136 game match. I mean, that would knock out the best of people, at least for a moment. But Carlsen's move, queen e1, it's not the best move. If black just plays queen to e7, then the queens just get traded and position is just totally equal and would just be a boring draw probably, which is after all what the goal of the Petroff is, to make a boring draw at this level. But queen e1 is kind of an interesting sort of reading of the opponent's mind, kind of saying, well, if you're playing a move like h5, you're probably not going to play queen e7 and try to just draw in a boring way. You're probably going to play the move king f8 and try to keep more tension in the position, maybe get some winning chances with some queen h4 or some pawn storm against the king. And unfortunately for Nepo, he played king f8, and now, very nice move. If you don't find this move, you're going to really struggle to prove any advantage whatsoever as white. But if you do find this move, you could get a good bishop versus, what is it, say it with me? A bad bishop. Good bishop versus bad bishop. We have the good bishop. And so, in this structure, we see that because white has the d pawn on a dark square, it means we would love to get rid of this bishop. We'd love to trade the dark squared bishops. And because black has a central pawn on the light square, black would be thrilled to trade off the light squared bishops. So based on that, you've probably figured out what the move is, and well done if you would have played the move bishop b4, because that's the move that Carlsen played here. And of course, bishop takes, queen b4, that's a pretty nasty fork. It's a good example of why you shouldn't really rush to be the first one to exchange unless there's a good reason for doing so. So black plays queen e7 instead, wanting to instead takes it after takes. Now black takes back and gets his queen more active with the recapture. But of course, we're still happy with this. I mean, it's not like we had an easy way to keep that tension between the bishops, nor is there really anything we would gain by doing so. Like a move like a3 is a little bit impish, if you ask me. By playing bishop d6, well, we achieved our goal of having the good bishop against the bad bishop. And our bishop was kind of under attack anyway, so it made sense to initiate the exchange in this case. Just to make sure that's crystal clear for you guys, because if you understand that one point, I could have easily made this the most common chess mistake, misevaluating this piece tension as pawn tension. But if you understand this one thing, it will make you a much stronger chess player. So, I plays move queen d2, connecting the rooks, getting out of the way of rook e8, so now the queen is no longer under attack. It's what advanced chess players call prophylaxis, and what more simple people like you and me like to call anticipating what the opponent is trying to do. So, White plays rook a to e1. It does shut in the rook on f1, but given that this rook can always come here after the rooks are traded anyway, it doesn't make a big difference. So this is where Nepo starts to not play to the demands of the position, but instead try to play to his own demands of, I need to win this game. And as soon as you say things like, I must, or I should, or I need to, well, that's when your mind starts taking yourself out of the game. And, well, if Nepo had worked with a certified high-performance coach, as I am, he would have probably not had these issues. But, well, I guess you live and learn, right? Also, let's see what is the right way to approach this position. So I'll give you two choices. Do you think that black should be playing this position to go all out for the, all out for the win? Or should we play it for a, play it for a draw? So should we just play to try to equalize in this position, or should we go all out for the win as black? Well, I'm reminded of a saying by Tigran Petrosian where he was, I forget who he was talking with. It was some international master who was playing a must-win game. So this IMA needed to win this game in order to qualify for a Soviet Championship final or to qualify for the next stage of the World Championship cycle. And he had a win with black. And so what the IM did is he started going completely crazy, like playing a random opening, just playing wild attacking moves, just attacking the opponent's king, no matter what the opponent did. And then he just found himself in a lost position very early in the game. And not surprisingly, he did go on to lose that game. And then when he lamented about this Tigran Petrosian, a former world champion, of course, from Armenia. And he was like, well, what do I do? Like, I played all these moves. Like, I tried my best to create an attack and get winning chances. And I just lost like an idiot. And then Tigran Petrosian said his words of wisdom. You want to write this down if you can. It is easier to win from an equal position than from a, say it with me, a losing position. It is easier to win from an equal position than from a losing position. And Nepo would have done well to heed this advice of the great world champion, who by the way is great master of anticipating the opponent's ideas as well. Because what Petrosian would have done is he would have said, okay, black is slightly worse because I have the slightly worse bishop. This is a principle of Mikhail Botvinnik, the great world champion and Soviet chess trainer. You may know of the Botvinnik school of chess, perhaps. And what he liked to say is that you could often correctly assess a position by comparing the bishops of the players. Now, I know one who's going to be go over wisecrack of, what if there are no bishops in the position? Well, that's maybe a subject for another video, but thank you for the suggestion. And so here we can say white's bishop is better than black's bishop for the reason I mentioned before. White's pawns are more on the dark squares and black's pawns are more on the light squares. So white's got the good bishop versus the not as good bishop. And black also has this rook that is not as active as the white rook. So if you compare the pieces, it's just quite obvious that white is a bit better. So black's first objective should be to try to bring the game closer to balance, closer to equality. And one way to try to bring the game closer to equality is to make reasonable exchanges. So, for example, you could play rook takes e1. That solves the problem, the tension between the rooks. And then black's king and rook are not doing that much, so let's get them into the game. g6. White may play some move. Computer trying to show off wants to play h4, but after king g7, we see that black is now able to play rook e8, trade off the rooks, and by trading the more of the heavy pieces, the rooks and the queens, it means that his king is no longer a weakness, and therefore black is able to gradually maintain the balance, and if black does play correctly, he will be able to hold a draw from this position. Of course, it's slightly unpleasant. White does have the better bishop and a little bit of momentum, but objectively, black can hold with, I think, too much difficulty, at least. I'm pretty confident that Carlsen would hold this position with black, even against a very strong player, without too many great problems, just a little bit of suffering. But instead of doing this, Nepo says, I've got to attack. Let's do a rook lift, rook h6, but where is the rook going from here? Well, you tell me. The rook is going to e6. He wants to try to challenge the rooks and keep a bit more tension in the position. And you could play rook takes e8 again if you want to. There's nothing really wrong with that move. But Carlsen came up with another move, and this is a great example of how to play to the demands of the position. And this is really related to the element of prophylaxis, right? Where you're not just thinking in terms of what can I do to my opponent, but you also balance that with what is the main idea or the most unpleasant idea of my opponent, and is there a way in which I can both improve my own position and complicate my opponent's moves, make it more difficult for them to do what they want to do. And it turns out here the answer is yes. So the way in which white effectively prevented rook e6 is by the move queen to g5, which exploits a bit of the fact that, h5, this pawn can't cover g5 anymore, true or true. And you also have dealt with the issue of rook e6, because now if black plays that, this pawn on h5 is on pre. Not too difficult, right? So what if black were to play a move like f6 here, trying to kick that queen away? You might ask, well, what exactly has white gained from this, from provoking this pawn forward? And the answer is actually quite a lot, because after rook takes e8, again, intermediate move, remember to look for alternatives, guys. And after bishop takes e8, we can put the queen back, queen to e3. And now we can see that because the pawn is on f6, that you no longer have to contend with the rook e6 idea, because the pawn is in the way. And pushing the pawn to f5 just creates a litany of weaknesses for us to pounce on. And also f6 itself is quite a loosening move. We see that the black king is now more exposed due to another pawn having moved a little bit towards, moving a little bit forward, as it were. And so white just has a very big advantage in this position, and a plan like rook e1 and c4 to bring the piece into the game and open up the center when they have the more open king will give us a very substantial advantage. This is why Nepo instead plays the move c6, which I think is a fairly natural decision, although it does put another pawn on a light square, so it does make this bishop a little less mobile, which is maybe the reason why the computer is drawn somewhat to moves like h4 and trying to use this pawn perhaps as a battering ram, or to try to create some sort of little weakness around the white king. Advanced players will probably notice as the fawn pawn, where you try to put a pawn in the opponent's 6th rank. So let's say I play a move like c3 for argument's sake. Then this would be an example of a fawn pawn, where this pawn basically is kind of a bit annoying for white, because if a queen were to get to g2, it would be checkmate, and even in an endgame, if black is able to somehow win this h2 pawn, let's say with a rook or another piece, then that pawn on h3 would only be 2 squares from queening. It's an advanced concept, you don't need to worry too much about it, but it's good to know for how to outplay high-level opponents. It's one idea that can come to mind. Though, of course, white doesn't have to allow this. He could also play h3 and make the very fair point that the h-pawn is a little bit weak, but with the rook defending it, I think it's not the end of the world for black. But instead of this, we had c6. Carlsen continued with the move rook takes e8, recycling the rooks so that he can play the move rook e1, and as we can see, there's still no rook e6 because of the fact that this pawn on h5 is on pre. This is quite important, and actually it also shows a very subtle tactical reason why c6 was imprecise, because let's say we imagine a situation after rook e6 where we take, and by the way, this is not back rank mate, because yeah, you found it. Queen e1 is not mate because bishop to f1. And this is what I want to impress upon you. This is really important to make a note of. If this pawn was on c7, black would play bishop b5, pin this bishop, and be completely winning. But here, with the pawn in the way, black just doesn't have time. If you play c5 trying to clear the way for bishop b5 like this, well, it just doesn't work. Or I could even play a move like queen takes d5, for example. And black isn't in time for bishop b5 because, well, there are a few reasons, but the simplest is queen takes c5 and you fork the king and the bishop. And that's all she wrote. So we can sort of see already how c6, like these little subtleties, of course, the average player doesn't have to worry too much about these things, but I think it's fascinating to see how one little move can make a big difference in a game. And certainly in high-level games, like these little things are what will make the difference between who wins and who loses. So black plays queen f6, a good move to safeguard the king. If your king is less safe than the opponent, trading the queens is usually a good idea. True or true. And here, Carlsen did not find the best move in the position. I guess he didn't play exactly to the demands of the position, but at least he got the general idea right. So like I mentioned before, trading the queens would not be to the demands of the position for white. What the opponent wants, probably we don't want, general principle. And Well, I placed the move queen e3, kind of assuming that, okay, I have to keep my pawn on d4 defended, because black's move had two ideas to trade the queens and attack the pawn, and also attack the bishop so I can get some initiative. Probably this is what was running through Carlsen's head in the game. But there was a better move, and it's a move that, again, this is maybe not the most common chess mistake that I originally planned to share in this video, but it's come up quite a lot, and that is to not jump to conclusions or to assumptions about what like has to be done in a position, rather than saying, well, I have to play queen e3, or I have to play queen takes f6. Instead, ask, well, do I have to? Is there another move I could play instead that might be a better move? The fancy term for this is called candidate moves, that if you have heard of or read the book Think Like a Grandmaster by Alexander Kotov, then you'll be very familiar with this buzzword. But if not, you can just say looking for alternatives. It means the same thing and makes you more easily understood by the average person. So, queen to g3 is the alternative in case you had not figured it out yet. It's not the easiest move. Carlsen did miss it as well. But the point is that queen takes d4. What if black just takes the pawn for free? Well, if you play queen to b8, you might have seen this idea of invading with the queen. But then black has a move rook e6, and he's kind of staying alive by the skin of his teeth at the moment. So again, we look for alternatives. We look for, say it, what's the word? We look for alternatives. The more you imprint that in your brain, the stronger chess player you're going to be. Of course, looking for alternatives in a bullet game, probably not the best approach, but in classical, it's how you win. So the key is we can play the move bishop f5. Again, a prophylaxis. We're not letting black block with rook e6. And the result of that is that black is not in time to deal with queen to b8. If black goes for a move like g6, trying to attack this bishop somehow, well, we can just move the bishop back. Because, I mean, we still have got queen b8, and it's just hanging like the sword of Damocles over black's head. Black is just completely lost. Queen takes b2. Yeah, who cares about the pawns? We have bigger fish to fry. Queen b8, and, well, it's probably even a mate somehow. I'll let you figure it out, but white's certainly winning a piece at the absolute worst case. So queen g3, great move. If you had found it, you played better than Magnus Carlsen, who played the move queen to e3 in this position. Black played the move bishop to d7, good move. Keep the bishop safe. White goes h3. I mean, h3 is always going to be a useful move because you never know when there's going to be a back rank check. Already in our analysis, we've seen a couple of cases where black nearly had a back rank mate, and having h3 just ensures it's not going to be an issue. True or true? So after h3, black goes h4, and what do you think about the move h4? Do you think it's a good move in the position? I think it's a good move. It certainly keeps your pawn safe, and if you can get in g5 and king g7, well, your king is somewhat safe in that case, at least compared to being stuck on f8 close to the draft on the e file as such. So in this position, Carlsen has a few different approaches. I will say it's interesting from a computer's perspective. The computer says the position is just very close to equal. White doesn't have any real advantage. But on a practical level, it's still a bit unpleasant because black still has got this rook stuck on h6, blocked in by the queen. Black still has the worst bishop, and black's king has still not found complete safety. I mean, it's not until you get to g7 or, let's say, to g8 safely that you would be completely safe. By the way, king g8 would be a big blunder because of the... what's the word? The back rank mate. You got it. Queen at e8, and that would be a checkmate. And so that kind of explains why you want to maybe play g5 and then king g7, since you don't have king g8 so readily available for black. At least not unless the white bishop moves to a different diagonal. And so white plays the move c4. It's an idea that we have seen a couple of times before, and it does make a lot of sense here because, well, in the game, black played d takes c4, and we see that now the center is a bit more opened up. The bishop is open, the queen is more open. It's just a good move to play on a very least on a practical level. And for what it's worth, dc4 might not be the most precise. Again, it's kind of jumping to a conclusion of, well, I take and I give him an isolated pawn, so it's a good idea. But if you don't have anything to attack that isolated pawn, then what good is it, really? Probably a more solid move was to play queen to d8, which I will admit is a much harder move to find when you don't have the engine screaming at you to play it. But the idea is it allows you to play like king to g8 and you're not running into queen e8 mate, or even to play like g5, king g7, or to prepare rook e6. It's just one of these moves that has a lot of good ideas to it, and very often, if you're trying to choose between different moves, the one that will be better is often the one that just gives you more good options available, where it doesn't just do one thing, but it does another useful thing at the same time, whether it's, preparing an idea of your own and stopping an idea of the opponent, or maybe preparing two good ideas for you at the same time. So after c4, black plays dc4, and this is the point, which was really the position that came to my mind when I decided to do this special training video for you on the most common chess mistakes. And here, black really did not play whatsoever to the demands of the position, but here you actually have an opportunity to improve on the play of both Nepomniachtchi and the suggestion that Magnus Carlsen made after the game. So if you want to try to play better than the world champion and the world championship finalist, pause the video and let me know in the comments below the move that you would play. And it is on move 21, in case you want to write the chess notation 21 ... This is my move. So, I'll never guess the move that Nepo played here. Well, unless you saw the game before. And the move that Nepo played is the move b5. I think you'll agree that the move b5 is just bad on a lot of different levels, actually. Like, it even looks kind of weird to play this because you're creating this backward c6 pawn. So that means the pawn can't be defended by another of its pawns, but can only be defended by the pieces. That makes that pawn a weakness. And not only that, but you also haven't really solved the problem of your king on f8 still being, in the draft, in the air, feeling that cold breeze, or maybe other ways like feeling that hot sun and getting, I was going to say a tan, but, getting sunstroke, let's say. So instead of this, there are better moves, of course, than this one, which I think was really the moment where we can say that Nepo was psychologically broken down, where Carlsen finally broke his opponent's mental stamina, his emotional state, and it allowed Carlsen to just beat him up like a drum. So instead of b5, after the game, Carlsen suggested the move queen to d6, which does do a good job of anticipating a queen a3 check, which was, you could say, the main idea at white's disposal. However, queen d6 does still allow white to play queen b3, and this fork is a little bit annoying. Granted, black isn't actually losing a pawn, instantly, because, well, after b5... Fine, now I'm saying b5 after castigating it before, but we can sort of see here that if black does play queen takes d4, which might seem like the obvious move, well, there is a tactical problem. You're not getting the pawn back as black... Well, you are, but only for one move, because we have a little switcheroo. Rook to d1, and this is called a... what's the word? A skewer. Very good, because the piece behind is more valuable than the piece in front. So when the queen moves away, we take, and look at that. Look how useful this h3 move is, because queen e1 is no longer mate. We have a hidey hole for the king, and we are up a bishop, and we win. So, of course, black is not forced to play queen d4, but then you are down a pawn, and it's not immediately obvious to me what black's compensation for the said pawn is. So, instead of queen d6 and being down a pawn, the best move for black, as was pointed out by Sam Shanklin in his notes, is to play king to g8. Because notice how the bishop has now moved away from this square, so it actually is possible to play this without getting back rank made with queen to e8. That's a very common type of chess mistake as well, where a player still visualizes that piece is on some square and doesn't realize that move that they couldn't play before can actually be safely played at this moment. So what might be the reason that one wouldn't play king to g8? Well, I think the main reason is probably that something like queen e7 looks scary, yeah? Where the rook can go on the 7th rank, and maybe this this special song, Rook on the 7th rank, money in the bank. Well, you know it now at least. But after queen e7, it's not as bad as it looks. For one thing, black has a very creative defense in this position. Maybe you assume that black has to play queen takes e7. Again, assume. You notice whenever I say assume, it means it's a type of chess mistake being made. And after rook d6, defending the bishop, then white just plays rook takes f7, and okay, white is up a pawn. Pretty good outcome. And of course, bishop e6, you're running into, the b7 pawn being hanging. That's its own litany of problems. But there's actually a better move here. Black can cut off the communication between the queen and the rook with bishop e6. which, by the way, is also hitting the bishop on c4, so that's why white doesn't have the time to go pawn grabbing with queen takes b7 here. Arrows are going a bit crazy, but we got there in the end. So white might play, for example, queen to e8 in this position. You can trade the queens as well, but the arising ending is just very close to being totally equal. F takes e6, and, well, this pawn is weak, but so is the d4 pawn. H4 is a bit loose, but you can defend it with the pawn or with the rook, and, black will hold without too much of a struggle here. But if queen e8 instead, well, you get this position that, okay, practically it's a little bit unpleasant because the black king is a little bit open, and, say, rook e4 and the rook is queen are a bit stuck. But at the same time, white also has some weaknesses as well, and definitely with moves like rook g6 and creating counterplay against the white king, black will be able to defend this, and a draw would be the fair outcome from this point in the game. It looks ugly, but it's one thing for a position to look ugly, and it's another to have, like, actual big problems, and here black has got all of the bases covered. You can take the engine's word for it. But instead of going for this, as I mentioned before, Nepo blundered with the move b5, and the problem with b5 is also a tactical one as well as a strategic one. So if you did see the reason why b5 is a big mistake, then congratulations. The answer is that we play queen to... What's the square? What's the square that we move our queen? Giving you a hint, guys, in case you missed it. It's queen to a3. It makes sense, right? Because any other move, pretty much they can just take the bishop, or you just don't have anything. But when we have a check, well, you can't take the bishop while the king is in check. Well, unless the bishop is a checking piece, but that's another story. So black plays the move king to g8. Probably realizing that if you play queen to d6 to block the check, white just takes the pawn anyway. And white just wins a pawn because you can't take that bishop because back rank mate. It's been a lot of a theme actually of this game, back rank mates, because if you played with a lot of young children, or maybe you are a young junior yourself, as I once was, believe it or not, well, maybe you've had this experience of not seeing the back rank mate, and, well, maybe it makes you feel better that also Nepomniachtchi did not see this this queen a3 and this whole idea. So Nepo plays king g8 instead, and what Nepo said afterwards in the press conference is that after queen takes a7, he just didn't realize that after that pawn is taken, that the idea is not just to take the pawn. This is important. This could win you a lot of chess games, to realize that chess moves have several ideas. The idea is not just to execute the threat or just to defend against a threat, but a defensive move or an automatic move can also have a threat of its own. And so you may have realized that if black were to take that bishop, white then takes black's bishop, queen takes d7, and white is up a pawn, and they've got the attack on the king, and because this rook looks so silly, white is actually just winning. Worst case, you can always push your a-pawn and queen it. Never a bad plan to get a second queen and checkmate the opponent's king with that queen. Instead, Nepo played a little bit differently. I will point out, by the way, another trick is that if black does play some move like bishop takes h3, trying to do a little desperado tactic, we're saying, well, okay, if you take me, I'll take you, and I'm not down a pawn anymore. I got out scot-free. But there are some tactics, and white can play the move queen takes f7. You could go rook e8, but, I mean, you guys wanted the queen sack. I know you wanted the queen sack, so I'm here to deliver. Queen f7, rook to e8, king h7, because obviously they can't take the rook because of the pin by the bishop, yeah? So king h7, bishop takes, and I think that this position, I would agree with Sam Shanklin's original assessment, that this should be a win for white with best play. And the reason is because you're not just up a pawn, that's one advantage, but you also have the better bishop, because black's bishop is kind of, stuck with the same color complex as these pawns. White also can play moves like rook e5 and try to attack this way if he wants to be creative. White can also create a passed pawn, and we see how it's much easier for white to get the king active compared to black, because the black king is kind of cut off by the rook and to some degree also by the white bishop. And I drew a million arrows, but I think that helps you to understand why white is probably technically winning in this position, right? But still, this was probably the best chance for black to try to muddy the waters, because in the game after the move queen to d8, white simply moved the bishop back, and white was just a pawn up for absolutely nothing. And not only that, but the rook is still misplaced. We still have heavy pressure against f7, so we see that the black king is still quite exposed, and the white pieces coordinate a lot better. And while Nepo didn't play it in the best way, I'm going to show you the moves quickly just so you can see how to actually win in these positions, because I know from my own experience that the main thing that probably, as I accidentally played wrong move, actually Nepo played rook d6. The main thing that probably held me back from getting a 2-600 FIDE rank was that I would often get winning positions, but I would often fail to convert them against these other fellow grandmasters. So it's good to know how to actually win. First step, rook e4, we just attack the weaknesses while defending our own pawns. That's a good idea. Black goes bishop e6, trying to get out of the straitjacket he's in with this pin from the queen and the bishop. But it also leads to this queen ending after bishop takes, rook takes. White could play f takes if he wants, but then his king is very exposed. Moves like rook g4 or even queen c5 and just switching over to attack this weakness is just immensely unpleasant for black. So black takes his chances in the queen ending, but the queen endgame is also a relatively straightforward win. Now you might be wondering, well, what is the winning plan if black just plays some solid move like queen to a8 or queen d7 and just refuses to lay down and die? Well, you play a4, you just defend the pawn, that's easy enough. And if they continue passively like queen to e8 or something, well, in that case, you can even just play queen to g5 and just pick off the second pawn like a scab. And if, let's say, they play queen d7 saying, well, you don't have queen g5 because I take you on d4, well, I can get by with some other angles. One idea that is very effective in queen endings, and this one you want to pay attention to, maybe even write it down if you can, is that the way to win a queen endgame is to promote a pawn to a... what's the word? To a queen, exactly. And what's the way to promote a pawn to a queen? How do we get that? Well, the key step is by creating a passed pawn. And so, therefore, the idea of b3 may have occurred to you to play a4 and create that passed pawn on the queen side, because the queen by itself can't stop it. You need the king as well in order to deal with a passed pawn. Well, unless you can get some perpetual check on the king, but we see that black is a very long way from getting the queen to e1. And even if they do king h2 and it's still not an immediate perpetual, so the white king is pretty safe at this point. And certainly a plan like a4 is just going to be winning for white. We'll say take, take, and white will just push this pawn down. If black tries to stop the advance of the pawn, let's say queen b7 and covers here, we can always just play queen b6 because the pawn ending is winning for white with the extra pawn, and just support the shepherding of that pawn, the queen being the shepherd and the a5 pawn being the sheep that's about to turn into, well, the King Kong version of a sheep, whatever that is. You can embellish as you like for me. So in the game, black plays queen a5, saying, well, if I sit there and let him take my pawns or let him queen a pawn, I'm just going to die. So let's try to make things a bit more messy and get the queen in this way. But again, the threat is not actually that real, because white's threats are better. Queen takes e6 was played, queen to e1, king h2, queen takes f2, queen takes e6. This is with a check, so black doesn't have time to play queen f4, queen c1, and do this kind of perpetual check sort of thing, or to take the pawn on d4 for that matter. Now after king h7, queen e4, again another check, so it's a very useful technique in these queen endgames to put our queen to a better position with tempo, so that is with check. And after king g8, just simple move b3, just keeping everything defended. Again, some players might think, oh, queen g3, this is an annoying check, but if you go one move deeper, you see that black has no follow-up check. The squares are all covered by white's queen and by the king, so it's all good in the hood when the queen is in the center. So after queen takes a2, white plays queen e8, refusing to fall asleep at the wheel, continuing to play those best moves. Queen takes b5, take a pawn and defend this pawn at the same time. Good or good. Queen f2, trying to get some tricks in, but one queen move will rule them all. Put the queen in the center. Queen e5. Stop queen to g3. Stop queen f4. Keep your pawn safe. And the rest was a matter of technique, as some lazy annotators like to say. Queen to b2. Queen e4. Queen d3, just making sure that the pieces are all defended. The g3 is covered. Black goes queen f2, saying let's try a perpetual check. White plays very nice move, queen c3. Again, a little prophylaxis. White is up 2 pawns, so there's no need to, try to win as quickly as possible. Better to take a little more time, but be absolutely certain that you win the game. So queen f4, queen g1. We have stopped all black's counterplay, and hey, it's move 40. So that means white has made the time control and gets an extra 60 minutes on the clock. game ended with king h7, queen to d3, and now a very good finishing move of queen d1. Just very, very good technique by Carlsen to not give black any hope of a check along the back rank. And after queen e3, king h1, we see that black just can't make a sensible check against the white king. And with the queen behind the passed pawn, we just go push, 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 push. And that's over. Game ended g5, d5, g4 is kind of a rage quit attempt. Hail Mary, but after hg4, h3. White neutralizes attempt to try to create a perpetual checknet by playing the move queen f3. Again, using the trade of queens to white's advantage, because when you're up 2 pawns or 3 pawns of pawn ending, it's going to be a win. And here, since moving the queen just allows the king up and black doesn't really have a good follow-up check after that, Nepo finally laid down his arms and resigned here. There you have it. That was this game between Carlsen and Nepomniachtchi. We also got to learn about many of the most common chess mistakes. How about you tell me, let's see how well you've been paying attention. What are the most common types of chess mistakes that we talked about in this video? I suggest you write in the comments as well. That will help you to not just put it in your long-term memory, having it written down, but so that it's easy access in the game. But also you're going to see what other people say as well. And you're going to learn different things from one another, much more than just if you keep it all in your own head, circling around with your shopping list and, you know, and your job and, oh, I'd better get this for the kids, this sort of thing. So there were basically 3 most common chess mistakes we actually covered in this video. The first one was not playing to the demands of the position. So let's say trying to be very aggressive when you should be more solid and strategic, or playing very safely and slowly when you should be a lot more dynamic and aggressive. The second one that we saw was assumption. So that is just not basically, you could call it lazy calculation, where you just assume, oh, I have to play this move, or they have to play this move, and not what is the key thing we do to deal with assumptions. Let's see if you've been paying attention. We look, say it with me, we look for alternatives. Good job. And the third thing that we looked at as well, the other most common chess mistake, is basically misevaluating the piece tension. So that is making or initiating a poor exchange of pieces or a poor exchange of pawns, or perhaps mistiming when to exchange the piece and pawns when there are 2 of them attacking one another as such. So those are all important skills, and I'm very pleased to say that, well, now you are stronger in all 3 of these key skills: playing to the demands of the position, questioning your assumptions by looking for alternatives, and also the third thing that I mentioned, of evaluating who benefits from the exchanges of pieces or pawns. See, you're making me work hard as well, guys. Alright, so that's about all for this video. As always, if you enjoyed it, and I guess you did, otherwise you wouldn't be torturing yourself for nearly an hour, then smash that like button. Also, greatly appreciate it if you subscribe for more Grandmaster Chess lessons, and I will see you guys in the next video. Happy chessing.